What's up, everybody? Welcome to Venture Conversations. I'm your host, Tony. I got Pastor Brandon here with me. Hey, you'll notice we actually changed the title of our podcast. It's Everything's an Experiment. We can keep that in our heart internally. But here at Venture, we just want to have multiple conversations. And today we're going to talk about how to face your fears.
All right.
Very excited.
Let's do it.
But before we start, Pastor Brandon, let me ask you 3 questions.
Okay.
What are you watching? What are you reading? And what are you listening to?
What am I watching? Well, sports. It's Husky Raider season. Mariners just barely missed the playoffs, so now I'm a Red Sox fan the remainder of these playoffs.
Of course.
Honestly, Ted Lasso.
Oh,
Love Ted Lasso.
the best shows of all time. Roy Kent.
Yes, I have a man crush on Roy Kent.
You know, me too. And what are you reading right now?
Primarily just reading the Bible and a bunch of commentaries that have to do with 1 Samuel, which is what I'm teaching from on Sunday. So doing a lot of that.
And at the time of this recording, we've been going through a series called Legends and Legacies. It's been profound. We've done 3-4 weeks now. It's been amazing. So go back, listen to the podcasts. And last but not least, what are you listening to?
As always, I'm listening to the Bema podcast. I've enjoyed that. Recently, I started listening to Carey Nieuwhof's podcast on leadership. Good. It's really good. Yeah. And then I always enjoy Craig Gershell's leadership podcasts. Yeah, he's good. I primarily like them because they're about 20 minutes each one.
And that is the aim of this podcast, is to be no more than 20, 25 minutes because, hey, we want to value your time. The fact that you're listening, that matters so much to us. And if you're a leader out there, I would highly recommend both of those podcasts. They're amazing. But let's talk about how to face your fears. Now, PB, you're wiser than me, so I will let you get started. But maybe you could kind of kick us off with an introduction, and we'll talk about fear in general and then how to face it daily and things to go with. Yeah.
Yeah, we're both. I was a youth pastor for 12 years. You've been a youth pastor for how long now?
Serving for 10, been on staff for 7.
Okay. Yeah. So as a lifelong youth guys, one of the probably most prominent verses that youth pastors seem to always teach students is 2 Timothy 1:7. And it's this great reminder, and I'm going to read it. And I didn't bring my glasses, so... Oh, okay, right over here. I'm really embarrassed that I'm having trouble reading this. This is just great video. It says, "For God has not given us a spirit of fear and timidity, but of power, love, and self-discipline." So, when I was a youth pastor, I was always encouraging students to live fearless lives, be courageous. But one of the unique things about me, and especially if you're watching this and you were one of my old youth students, and there's thousands of you around the nation now, I was famous for all the things I was afraid of. And I just was a kid, and I grew up that way, and as I became an adult, I just was fearful. Yeah. Literally, I was afraid of everything. It started with, I had acrophobia really bad, which is a fear of heights. But by the time God finally brought me to the moment where I had to deal with and face my fear, I had 17 things that I was deathly afraid of.
Like you made a list?
I made a list. And when I say I was afraid, I mean paralyzing fear.
Oh my gosh.
Could not function around them. Do you want to hear a few of them?
I would love to hear these. Yeah.
Besides heights, which is kind of a normal one, I was deathly afraid of toxic mold.
Okay. You don't hear that often.
Well, I watched some documentary special on toxic mold and saw that it was destroying people's lives, and that stuff's scary. I also, you got to stop watching the History Channel because this messed with me too.
Yes.
But I watched a special on gypsies one time, and I just became deathly afraid of gypsies.
Gypsies?
Yeah, it was gypsies. I was deathly afraid of the doctor. So I had a phobia of going under and having surgeries. So whenever I would have to have a surgery or oral surgery or whatever it was, I refused to go under.
Like that you would wake up during the operation?
No, I just had this fear that like if they were going to work on my arm, I would wake up and not have an arm. And so I refused to let them put me under.
I'm not laughing at you. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. That is so.
Is there anything you're afraid of?
Yeah. So in the 3rd grade, I had to go see a counselor for this. Anytime there was thunder and lightning, I would instantaneously vomit. It was like classic. A trigger. So you would hear boom, and I go, oh! And I'll never forget. Wow. It was the middle of August, summer of 1998. I was in my mom's Grand Caravan. Thunder. I puked. She ran into Kmart with me. I only had my underwear on in Kmart. A little brown kid run through Kmart looking for clothes. Yeah, so I had that fear.
So you're Palestinian, so they don't have thunder and lightning in Palestine?
Well, I've only been 4 times, but no, okay. I don't think so.
All right. It's in your DNA.
It is in my DNA. It is. But I think for me, fear has been more, it's not even just like these big things like, I fear spiders and snakes. I'm also terrified of snakes. But I think fear for me has been more in the day-to-day things. Yeah. Fear of having a conversation with someone I know I need to have. Fear of public speaking. Fear of what if this goes wrong? Like, what if I try this and I epically fail? I think fear for me has been more in the day-to-day, but yeah.
Yeah, I think once you let fear take hold in your life and grab you, it controls every area of your life. Yeah. And the hardest thing about being a leader is fear can creep in and you become afraid of people. You become afraid of those kind of fierce conversations that you have to have. Yeah. And you almost, when fear grabs you and controls you, you become its subject. And it is very paralyzing. Yeah. And I think fear is what led to originally, I'm an insomniac, but I think it's what kept me up at night, not being able to sleep because I was afraid, what do these people think? What's going to happen if this? And then you have a fear of failure, like in ministry, what if, I still remember for years and years as, when I planted Venture, every Sunday I would think nobody's going to come. There's no rhyme or reason that people should ever show up to this church in a school. And every time I would walk out to speak, I would look around and I'd think, why are they here? They shouldn't be here. And then you go through the fear of this is Seattle, and Seattle's this highly educated area, and I am the least educated and dumbest person in this church, and they're listening to me, and you feel this way. I don't know, that the devil has a way of, once he lets fear creep in, you let it creep in, he uses it and grows it in your life. Yeah.
I think you're so spot on. I've noticed too with fear really maybe heightens what my current insecurity is. Yeah. Hey, right now, I'm afraid, be honest, like me, I've always been afraid of failure. I've wanted to become successful. That's what was modeled to me. But I'm constantly trying to redefine what does success really mean and what does it look like. So that's one of my insecurities. That's one of my fears. Another fear is, I think, in leadership, what if I mess up? And what if you have these people who are following you? What if they admire what you did and then suddenly you mess up and it's like, hey man, they're done. They're done with you. I think that there's always been this fear, Lord, I don't want to mess up. I understand there's room and there's grace, but I don't want to I don't have an epic failure. I don't want to mess up. So there's been that. I think what I want to hit on is, we read out of 2 Timothy that God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, self-discipline. What does that look like in the day-to-day of a leader or anyone listening to this podcast?
Probably when I look back at, I would say, the last 20 years of my life, there's this thought that the older you get, the less you change, the more you get kind of stuck in your ways. And I feel like the most profound change that ever happened in my life happened in my late 30s and early 40s. Wow. And it was really in terms of fear. And for those of you that know me now, and this, if I'm fast forwarding probably 12 years later, people say, Brandon, you're very courageous. I wouldn't think you had fear. You're fearless. Yeah. And I was doing a sermon series for Venture, and I was teaching on the life of Joshua, and the series theme was you need to be strong and courageous. And every time I was challenging our people to do courageous things, do adventurous things, do hard things for Jesus. And I would write these sermons and feel like a full-on hypocrite because I am like telling people to be fearless, and I am the most fearful person on the planet. And everyone knew it too. And then the other kind of critical moment, so the Lord was kind of really dealing with my heart there, but I was reading this book, The Barbarian Way.
Oh, Erwin McManus?
Killer book. Like his first book, excellent.
Yeah.
And he was talking about how he had one of his sons had climbed up on his roof and put what is it?
Like a cape or
cape on, yeah. And he was going to jump off his roof, and he said, my wife ran out and was like, get off the roof, get off the roof, get off the roof.
Yeah.
And he was like, secretly, I was so proud of my son because he was courageous enough to do that.
Yeah, it's awesome.
And I started watching my twin boys, and my twin boys were becoming, just like I was, afraid to do everything.
Wow.
And I just thought, I'm going to overcome my fear so that my boys can live courageous lives too. And they were probably 3, 4 at the time. So I determined what was my greatest fear. And my greatest fear is heights. And one of the things I said I would never do is, people always say, one of my bucket list things is I want to jump out of an airplane.
Yeah.
And I remember saying, that is something that I will never do. I mean, I wouldn't go on roller coasters. I wouldn't go up in the Space Needle. I wouldn't do anything that had anything to do with a height, right?
Oh my gosh.
And I thought, I'm going to overcome my fear.
Yeah.
And so for a sermon at church, I said, next Sunday, you are going to come, and I'm going to show you video footage of me skydiving.
You put your money where your mouth is.
Well, it was the only way I was going to do it is if I told the church I was going to do it. So I ended up going skydiving, and I mean, the whole time I had never been more afraid my entire life.
Oh my God.
And then when I jumped out of that plane, I was convinced, it was like a Bugs Bunny cartoon, that I was going to pull that chute and pots and pans were going to come flying out, and I was done. And a parachute came out.
Wow.
And I started floating through the air, and it was the most exhilarating thing in my life.
Yeah.
And I landed on the ground, and I remember the first thing I did was, dude, I want to go do that again. And I am telling you, something snapped in my life. And from that day on, the fear that had held me captive, it went away.
Yeah.
And so one of the things, like, I have tattoos all over my arms. And my tattoos tell my spiritual journey, and this tells the journey of my journey to courage. So all of these different tattoos on my half sleeve tell the story of things that I've done to say I will never go back to being a fearful person. I won't be afraid of people. I won't be afraid to try anything. Yeah. And so my life's motto, so when I think of like the core values for my life, one of my core values is, if I am afraid to do something, I must do that something.
Love that. Right. If you're listening, sorry to stop you. Write that down. Tweet that. If I'm afraid to do something, I must do that thing.
And it's because I never want to go back to fear controlling me.
So good.
And, you think, you've been at Venture for 10 years now, and you think of the things that we've done as a church over 10 years. Moved multiple times, bought buildings, sold buildings, and then built this massive building. And fearful Brandon, I would have tapped out. I couldn't have done it. I would have thought the devil would have convinced me everything that was impossible and it wouldn't happen and how I was going to fail. Yeah. But this, God did not give me a spirit of fear.
That's huge.
But of faith, love, and sound mind, Brandon is able to do it. One of the interesting things about Scripture is over 100 times throughout the Bible, we're told to not be afraid and have no fear. And so if there's ever a group of people that should be fearless, it is followers of Jesus. And that's because our full trust is in Him, that our hope is in Him, that our goal isn't that when we preach on Sundays or when we lead something in the church that all these people look at us and think, you did a really good job. Yeah. You did great. That was an amazing sermon. That's not the goal. The goal is that we stand before Jesus and we hear Him say, well done.
That's it.
And so when you preach to an audience of one. Yeah. When you lead, you're leading to honor Jesus. Yeah. And we're not when you kind of live that way, it kind of removes, I would call it, power that people have in your life. And you just want to serve Jesus and you want to please Jesus. And when you do that, fear goes away.
Wow. If you're listening, I think there's just so much wealth that comes from that. when you realize there's a grace on you and that God's hand and his provisions on you, hey, I'm going to be okay. We're going to conquer this thing. And I think I've noticed already, and I'm only 30, but there are so many people who have missed potential because they couldn't maybe just face a fear.
Yeah. On Sunday, I talked about when you talked about throwing the stone. I told the story of David and Goliath, and we've all heard that story 100 times. But I wanted to I called it a fresh revelation from the 100 sermons I preached on David. And I kept thinking of this idea of God can do more with a stone that's in the air than he can one that's in the riverbed. Wow. And I want people to don't just keep that stone in your pocket, but throw that stone. Go it's for huge. It. Yeah. And you think of it with our kids, and we're both parents. Yeah. And when our kids, when they try something and don't succeed at it, they're still our kids. We still love them. It whether they succeeded or didn't succeed, didn't change the way that we loved them. And when you really view your relationship with Christ that way, and you say, he's my heavenly Father, I'm his kid, and whatever I do, whatever I try, whether I succeed or fail, he still loves me. It just provides this security where you're willing to take big risks. And the coolest thing about taking a big risk is that sometimes it works. And
what happens if
everything great that has ever happened in the world
That's it.
Is because someone tried something great, and probably a million times it failed, but there was that. We all know the one time that it worked.
I think that's so huge. I think you said it. If you're here and you're listening or you're watching and you're like, man, I am crippled by fear, or I have pockets of fear in my life. I think if you can now begin to shift your perspective from what will others think to, hey, I have an audience of one. And as long as I'm trying, as long as I am operating in what he's asked me to do. One of my mentors said this recently to me: if I'm in the presence of God, what could go wrong? If I'm doing the thing Jesus asked me to do, what could go wrong? I mean, I've had failure after failure after failure, but then you're right. When you hit just even an ounce of like, okay, that might have worked. And I think for me, though, also I've learned that when something goes right or awesome, and I don't want to just live off that success, I want to continue, because then I don't want to become like I'm not the guru in it. I want to continue to learn and be the student. So I think PB, this was powerful. If you're watching, you're listening, and you're like, hey, I struggle with fear of the unknown, fear of failure, micro fears, little fears, talking to people, fear of spiders. I think if we can encourage you today, begin to maybe shift your perspective. Hey, I have an audience of one. I know God. God knows me. I mean, there's just so much power behind that. Is there any other, maybe closing remark you'd say to everyone listening or watching on fear?
I think the goal of this life is really simple.
Yeah.
Be able to look yourself in the mirror and say, it is well with my soul.
That's it.
If it's well with your soul, you have nothing to fear.
That's the mic drop. So I think on that note, we could wrap this up. Hey, we want to thank you so much for joining us today, talking about facing your fears. This is a great conversation. Maybe you could comment below if you're on YouTube, Facebook. We'd love to hear maybe something you want to conquer, and we want to come alongside you, encourage you. We have pastors on staff here at Venture that would love to help you out too. Don't forget, subscribe. We'd appreciate if this blessed you. We'd love if you could just share it. That'd be awesome for us. We'd love to continue just to grow this podcast. But thanks so much for joining us. Next week or next episode, we're going to talk about comparison.
I have more hair than you. Comparing myself to you.
On that note, have a great week. We love you guys. We'll see you next time.